Hey story lovers, today we're breaking down 10 common writing mistakes you might be making. So grab that favorite pen of yours, we're diving in. Hey guys, and welcome back. I'm Brian with Right Now. If you're new to the channel, comment down below and make sure to hit that subscribe button as it helps out the channel a lot. Now, as I said, we're going to break down 10 common writing mistakes, but before we begin, I need some coffee. So I made a lot of mistakes as a beginning writer. I wasn't even aware of a lot of different techniques that either I should have been doing but wasn't, or things that I was doing but doing incorrectly. And it really took a long time of study and practice in undergrad and grad school to really hone in and figure out what it was that I was doing wrong and how to be a better writer. So what I want to do is just help you figure out these mistakes early on so that you can nip them in the butt and grow as a writer smoother, faster, and more efficiently. So let's jump into our 10 common writing mistakes, and stay tuned to the end because we have a bonus mistake that was a game changer when it came to my writing. So mistake number 1 is going to be info dumping and boring exposition. Now, I get it. I understand there's a lot of stuff that your reader needs to know, but they're not going to remember any of it if you're jamming it all down their throat, one thing after the other in a tight little spot. For example, you got that opening paragraph, and you're jumping in 5 characters, giving them all names, and they're just shotgunned at the reader. They're not going to know who to follow, what to do with all this information. They're not going to understand how any of this is going to be playing out. You're just throwing too much at them at once, and it's still going to make them close the book and not want to read anymore. So what I suggest is make sure that the pacing for this information is played out nicely and smoothly, and just don't give the reader more than they can handle. Don't describe every little detail, and if you do need to use exposition, make sure that it doesn't lose the flair and the character that's of the story. So mistake number 2 is going to be switching verb tense, and that's when you are going from past or present tense into another tense, and that can really confuse and trip up your reader. The reason for this is that when they're reading a story and they're in present tense, John is walking, John picks up a rock, and then all of a sudden they're reading John felt this, or John fell down, or John was doing this. They don't know if they're in a flashback or if they're still in the same scene or what's happened. And so this can just really aggravate the reader, and you want to try to avoid this as much as you can. So mistake number 3 is going to be skipping the trouble. And this is a very common mistake, and the reason for it is that we create this character that we really grow an attachment to, and we love this character, and to us, it's not just ink on a page. This is a real person. And so what happens is most people don't really like hurting other people, especially not people they like. So you get this character on the page, and now you're forced to do the task of hurting your character. So when a reader sits down and wants to see a character overcome obstacles, what they really want to see is that character getting run through the mud and beaten and dragged through hell so that they can overcome these obstacles and come out the other side again, either winning or losing in that task. And so as writers, we really need to make sure that we are doing that to the full extent. Basically, as a rule of thumb, if it can go wrong for your character, at some point, it should. So remember this tip: throw trouble in your character's way, see what they do. Your job is not to make their task easier. Your job is to make your character's task harder. Before we get to mistake number 4, if you're enjoying the video, make sure to hit that like button and press subscribe. And make sure to stay tuned to the end of the video because we have that bonus mistake coming up that changed everything for me. So mistake number 4 is going to be experimental writing. And this is basically when writers try to be unique or different simply for the sake of being unique or different. And this really doesn't serve your story. This is more serving the writer. And remember, readers don't pick up a book because they want to see how interesting the mind of the writer is. They want to read an interesting story. And the way that you tell an interesting story is by having interesting characters, not interesting concepts for the sake of concepts. Now, don't get me wrong, an interesting concept is going to be a great thing, but it can't be the only interesting thing about your story. Your characters should take that first focal point. An easy way to check if you're making this mistake is whenever you think you might be being experimental for the sake of being experimental, ask yourself this one question. What's more important to this story? Your characters or some grand concept or new way of writing? If the answer is not your characters, then you might be experimenting for the wrong reasons. So, 5th mistake is going to be using all those adverbs. Now, there's nothing wrong with having adverbs here and there, but when you start flooding the page with exasperatedly, slowly, angrily to try to describe what's happening, that's really a big sign of amateur writing. So, the 6th mistake is going to be having a build-up in your story that doesn't have a payoff. So a lot of the times what this means is that you have hints that something big is going to happen in your story later on. But then when the reader gets towards the later on, that big thing never happens. And sometimes this happens in experimental writing as far as I'm concerned, an excuse for lazy writing. But this is honestly a pretty common mistake simply because a lot of the times when you're writing, you have these ideas for what you want to happen in your story, but you really don't know necessarily where they're going to be leading to. And that leading to part is one of the things that the revision process is going to be for. That's what the 2nd and 3rd and 4th draft is for, is putting in those things later on that make it look like you knew what the leading up to was going to be doing all along. Now, vice versa goes just as true. You know, you can have no build-up, but have some random payoff towards the end of the story. So you have this big climactic moment, but nothing was really leading to that moment. And so one of the ways we fix this is in that 2nd, 3rd draft, where we go back and say, okay, now we're going to put all the little hints along the way to make it look like I knew that was going to happen all along. So the 7th mistake is going to be adding fluff. Now, this is something that a lot of writers do subconsciously in order to expand and add to their story. So for example, if somebody has a story that they want to be 40, 50 pages long, and they only have 30 pages or 20 pages in their story, sometimes a lot of writers will end up adding in things that aren't really needed in the story. So for example, you can have a detective story, and in this story, the detective is trying to figure out what happened to a missing person. Now, the potential fluff could be adding in some other cases that aren't related whatsoever to either the external or internal story that's happening. The external being the physical thing that the detective is trying to do, and the internal being that personal story that's happening within the character themselves. Maybe it's a bad marriage at home or something, whatever it is. But if this other thing that you're introducing into the story has nothing to do with progressing either of those things, then that's going to be considered fluff, and you should usually avoid that. So the 8th mistake is going to be a big one, and that is grammar. Now, it is true that the most important thing of your story is the story. However, that doesn't mean that grammar goes out the window. I see a lot of beginning writers who think that they can write with absolutely horrible grammar, and it doesn't matter because all that really matters is the point they're trying to get across to the story. This could not be further from the truth. if you are going to submit a story for publication to an editor and there are a bunch of grammatical and syntactical errors littered throughout the page, they're going to take one look at it and throw it in the trash. Keep in mind, the more grammatical errors that you have on the page, the harder of a time your reader is going to have at understanding exactly what it is you're trying to say. So yes, your story and your concept is the most important element. However, the easiest way to communicate that story to the reader is by using good grammar. Mistake number 9 would be using cliches. And when it comes to your writing, you should avoid cliches like the plague. See what I did there? The reason that we avoid cliches is because they've been done over and over 1,000 times, and the reader, when they come across them, they're gonna have that little internal groan that makes them go, God, that was cheesy, and they might not continue on for too many of those. So, when writing, just look out for these cliches, remove them from your writing, replace them with something that's a little bit more fresh, a little bit more eloquent or beautiful or just anything else. So the 10th mistake is going to be unfocused narration. So this is going to be where the reader is being taken in too many directions and they don't really know where to focus their attention. Keep in mind, readers are pattern recognition machines, so they're going to take the bits of information that your story is giving them and they're going to follow it to what they think is going to be a necessary conclusion. And what happens is when your narrator, the speaker of your story, is suggesting that there are many, many different ways that the story could go, it confuses and frustrates the reader, and they might not stick around long enough to get to where your story is trying to lead them. So the way that I would fix this is simplify the main central plot, especially in the beginning of the story, so that the reader has a clear understanding of where they're supposed to follow. So our bonus mistake is going to be trying to sound like a writer. I know that might sound weird. We are writing after all. Of course we're gonna sound like writers, but that's not quite what I mean. What I mean is adding in certain language that is going to fit the stereotype of a writer. I'm talking about the purple prose, the poetic prose, the stuffy prose. So the poetic being a whole bunch of roller coaster language to sort of make it feel like there's a rhythm to your story without there really being a need for one. On the other hand, the stuffy prose is going to be adding in language that makes your speaker, your narrator, sound like they're from 18th century England. Some readers do look for that, but by and large, your story is probably going to read a lot better if you have a more contemporary conversational voice. So adding in all of that stuffiness or adding in all of that poeticness, you might think that it's elevating your writing, but really it just comes across as amateur writing. Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to ring that bell if you want to be the first to be notified of my upcoming content, and make sure to check in next week as we start our month of horror. That's right, for all of October, each week I'm going to be putting out a horror or Halloween themed video talking about writing in the horror and Halloween genres. So stay tuned, keep writing, till next time.